welcome to Young Professionals in Foreign Policy's live stream on maritime intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. I'm Jeffrey Hoevenagel. The maritime domain faces an uncountable number of complex challenges, ranging from terrorism to illicit drug trafficking. Blue water navies operating over vast open oceans already face diverse threats, especially with naval power projection. However, the littorals pose a far greater challenge than the open oceans due to the rapid change of the tactical and operational environments, considering the range of different warfare capabilities and threats that exist. Perhaps an extreme example of these multi-layered threats is Al-Qaeda's Abed al-Rahman al-Nashiri, a planner for maritime attacks who developed a strategy that included ramming of ships with explosives, attacking supertankers with air assets, underwater attacks, and targeting cruise liners to take hostages. Deploying countermeasures to these threats is a major challenge because navigating within the littorals is difficult due to the amount of noise and sound found close to land. The littorals cannot be underestimated. 60% of the world's population lives within 100 kilometers of the ocean. 70% lives within 320 kilometers. 320 kilometers. Cities with populations of more than 1 million are located in the littorals. 90% of global trade by volume is carried by sea ships. Maritime domain awareness is critical to mission success. Maritime's ISR's objective is to achieve decision superiority by providing the commander with an information advantage through a combined picture of the operational environment through intelligence collection assets, allowing the commander to respond in a timely and proportionate manner in a highly contested environment. To simply put it, Maritime ISR is about delivering the right information to the right person at the right time. Before I start, I want to thank NATO for supporting YPFP for making this event possible, and I would like to remind all the viewers that you could add your comments, you could ask your questions in the comments section below. To explore this topic, I have the great pleasure to welcome the following speakers. Captain Ronald Block, who joined the Naval Academy in 1981. He had operational command of a frigate twice. He had command of the Netherlands Sea Training Command. He has been deployed to the Arabian Gulf and Afghanistan. He holds a master's degree on National Strategic Resourcing from the US-based Industrial College of the Armed Forces. From 2012 to 2015, at the Ministry of Defense, he was responsible for the procurement programs of new frigates, submarines, and mine warfare vessels. From 2015 to 2019, he held the position of Director of the Netherlands Coast Guard, a civilian network organization separate from the Navy. As of 2019, he serves in the International Military Staff at NATO HQ. On my right, Commander Philippe Cornet has a distinguished 40-year career in the Belgian Navy. In 1973, Philippe started his military career and became a Navy officer. He served on several mine warfare vessels and frigates, between several tours on various ships, including a few command positions. He was appointed to different staff positions, assuming command of the naval base of Zeebrugge, holding the position of Principal Assistant of the Chief Staff of the Belgian Navy and Director of Public Relations of the Navy. His staff experience included the Navy Operational Command, the planning section of the weapon systems of the Belgian Naval Staff, and the Belgium-Netherlands Operational School. After being appointed to Director at Egoermin and Director of the NATO Naval Mine Warfare Center of Excellence, he retired in 2012. Since then, he has provided consultancy services to various maritime and defense companies. Presently, he's Senior Business Developer for Belgium Advanced Technology Systems, BATS. Ronald and Philip, thank you very much for taking your time to be here, and welcome to YPFP. Ronald, let's start with you first. The littorals are highly complex environments and require a joint doctrine approach. Could you provide your insights into your work at NATO to achieve greater domain awareness?
Thank you, Geoffrey. I think your intro was great, and you sounded like a Navy officer, so I'd like to compliment you there. Given your last question, my work at NATO HQ is highly political, where we try to reach consensus with 30 member nations. We're not zooming into specific tactical stuff like maritime situational awareness in the littorals. So in my current position, I'm not dealing with that, but in the past I did. And I think, given your intro, that the majority of traffic travels through the littoral waters. I don't know whether our audience is aware of the exact definition of littoral waters, but let's say they're crossing through the 200-mile zone from land most of the time. And especially in some areas, you have a high congestion. So, for instance, in front of the Belgian coast, we have one of the most congested areas in the world. And with approximately 260,000 ships movements a year, it's quite a challenge for authorities to identify who is who, what cargo is on board, whether they're good guys or bad guys, and I'll come to that later on. So it is a science in itself, but we'll express later on today what that means.
And Philip, you'll be introducing a fascinating subject matter, but also a very real threat that is often forgotten. Can you indulge the people watching?
Okay, most of the time when we speak about maritime security and also what's important is intelligent reconnaissance and surveillance, we speak about two major threats: terrorism and piracy. Most of the time, because there are no real war at the moment, so they are the two focus of maritime security for the moment. But we forget one of the most important asymmetric threat, the naval mine. Naval mine exists since 1776 with the Bushel-Smith mine. Slide 1, please. And you can see on your slide on the top left a wooden barrel, because Confederate like to drink port and sherry. They recycled their barrel to make it naval mine. It was a very simple system to destroy enemy ships. And since then, the mine has become a very, very important instrument in the littoral. Why in the littoral? Because a mine is only effective within a certain depth of water. You have an amount of explosive in a mine. If the mine is too deep, it will not affect a ship passing above the mine. Most of people doesn't know, since World War II, from the 18 US ships that have been heavily damaged or sunk, 14 have been damaged or sunk by mine. So it's still a very important threat, even in peacetime. And it is very realistic, very actual. Not so long ago in Libya, we had to make the entrance of the port of Misrata free of mine, and we discovered mine put by the Libyan in the entrance of the harbor. So in that case, it was very difficult to have intelligence or to make reconnaissance, because you are in enemy territory. And the mine that we found was just a simple old Russian mine. You can see one example on the slide 1. On the second photograph, and they just put it on the Zodiac, and they sunk the Zodiac in the channel. So that was a special way to mine a port. Okay, let's transfer that experience into the very heavily region of the North Sea. If you do the same in Hamburg, Rotterdam, and Antwerp, we will need at least at least 3 weeks to tell the authorities that the entrance of the port is safe with our ships. And so Europe will be without any provision. After, I think, 1 week, we will suffer of empty shops and things like that. So it's a very, very actual threat and very difficult to annihilate.
Let's give you some intelligence questions. There's an increasing number of assets, so unmanned vehicles, UAVs, UUVs, it's ever increasing. So for Ronald, we're conducting more and more ISR missions from the seabed to space. From your, say, operational experience, is there a risk for an information overload to the operator and analyst of having way too much information?
Very good question, but I don't think it is. Military and industry and research centers are well aware of this issue. So if you want to expand the capacity of your sensors, whether that's shipborne, airborne, or autonomous, we realize that bringing on board more data, you need to automate as well. So there is a huge effort being paid on the man-machine interface, the man in the loop, to have the biggest performance of that man in the loop. So I don't worry about it, but it is a science in itself, and of course, once in a while, especially in multi-threat, in peacetime it's not an issue, but in crisis it can be, because then it's not only the surveillance that you do, but there's more coming to that platform.
From Philip, from the industry perspective, what sort of solutions do you have or look into in trying to manage all that data? So we've got all these buzzwords coming out, like big data analytics. Like, how does the commander at sea have these, say, resources from industry?
Until now, the method was to have operator on board analyzing data in real time and providing the command with solution, firing solution, threat solution. Nowadays, what we try to achieve is to provide the decision maker, the man in the loop, basically, with pre-processed information. Not raw data, but data that is already processed. The difficulty is to provide pre-processed information that you need a big computing capability, and you need also good algorithm. And the sea environment is a very difficult place. First of all, if you use drone, they will be far from the ship. They will not have a lot of power to communicate and to process information. So the computing capability is limited by the battery. If you use a lot of battery for computing, you have less for endurance of your drone. And so I think the challenge is to find just something in between, that you have enough processing on board, let's say kind of artificial intelligence. Then you can provide the operator with good information, classified target, for example, instead of just a possible target, and then still keeping enough endurance to perform your mission. Because if you need to stay very close to the ship because you don't have enough endurance, you don't need drone, you can use the ship.
You touched upon something very interesting for unmanned systems. And let's go to Ronald for this one, because you've got the procurement experience, for example, with submarines as well, and you're looking at requirements from a military perspective. From unmanned systems, they have faced many challenges in the contested environments, in the littorals. What are the current challenges that unmanned systems face in regards to its survivability? Because we've here last week in Scotland, there was an unmanned vehicle, an unmanned vessel, wave glider, that washed up in Scotland, and no one claims ownership. With preliminary reports that the submarine unit was most likely probably cut loose, so a technical flaw or a technical mistake. How can we mitigate these challenges and make it more survivable in these hostile environments?
Great question, but not easy to answer. First of all, in the maritime domain, we use three kinds of drones, unmanned systems. The flying ones for surveillance at the surface from the sky. The ones that are afloat, so at the surface, and the ones that are under the surface. And they all have their own challenges. People must be aware that I think the development of aerial drones in innovation in that domain goes the fastest, and that's related to scale. We have a lot of manufacturers and a lot of customers are interested in aerial drones. With regard to surface and subsurface, it's way less in many aspects. With regard to the threats that you're mentioning, you have natural threats, colliding into objects, technical failures like cable malfunction, communication malfunction. Service, more or less the same applies, but then again, if it's on the surface, it's easier to find, to relocate. But manufacturers are well aware, if they want to sell these products, they have to be foolproof. And so many manufacturers, whether it's aerial service or subsurface, do build in backup systems and recovery mechanisms. So on two ends, we're working to improve that capacity. But what Philip just mentioned, a lot of focus is being paid on unmanned systems. But unmanned systems sounds great, but it's not a target in itself to acquire unmanned systems. It needs to serve a certain effect, a certain target that you want to reach. And one of the issues that we face in the maritime domain is a shortage of manning. So to reduce the man in the loop, that's where a lot of the colleagues think we should add unmanned systems. But people don't realize that unmanned systems require highly skilled people as well. And that's another challenge that we bring to the market. Okay, provide me a foolproof drone, but I need to save on manning as well. And not only on board the mothership, but also there's an option for cooperation between state entities, whether that's navies or Coast Guard, and industry. I'm a strong believer in strategic alliances between governmental organizations and private companies to solve all these issues, including the manning issue.
If I may add, one of the issues in mine warfare, because a mine is underwater, it's a very small object, it's very difficult to detect. Until now, we were going with a ship, full crew, into the minefield to try to find the mine with a sonar. It's not acceptable anymore to go with a crew in a minefield. The politician will not accept to risk a crew trying to find a mine. So we had to find other solution. So a few years ago, we introduced already drones to try to find a mine with all the difficulties Ronald mentioned, and Geoffrey, reliability and effectiveness. So in this case, for mine warfare, is not only reducing manning, but also keeping the crew safe from the mine. So the ship will stay outside of the minefield, and we will send drone to investigate, to search, to make reconnaissance of areas to see if there are mines and if there is any danger before going into the area.
And this is a question for both of you following up on, say, for example, requirements survivability. Developing requirements and technologies takes time to develop. And considering, we could even say other examples, like say the A400M for other military programs, it takes decades sometimes. Even the F-35 has taken decades. Considering these lengthy procurement programs, how do you ensure the capabilities that you built today is still relevant when being deployed?
How long do we have to answer that question? My biggest concern in the maritime domain, especially the military maritime domain, is life cycle support. How do I maintain a ship with high tech on board for a lifetime, let's say 25, 30 years, while when we buy mobile phones and laptops and we change them every 3 years because they're outdated. Now it's easy to replace your laptop or your iPad, but systems aboard a ship are connected, and the total wiring on board a Navy frigate is more than 2 times around the globe on cables. And when you change the computer, then you have to change the cables as well, so it's very costly. So this is a really challenge in the maritime domain, and more and more merchant operators are facing exactly the same because they bring more technology on board, and it's not that easy on board a ship to replace it.
On the industry side, say we are pleased because we are seeing that the navies are adapting quite fast to the problem of obsolescence, let's say, because we know we are building a new ship with the Netherlands for mine warfare. It's a fantastic program. We will build the same ship for both countries with the same toolbox. Toolbox is all the kind of drones we will have on board, from air, surface, and subsurface. And we know we have ordered the drone now, and the drone are being tested on in the Netherlands by a special team. But we know when the first ship will come out in 2024, if everything is going well, those drones would be obsolete. Definitely, within 4 or 5 years, there will be new technology. So we are now already thinking with the industry and defense about the Toolbox 2.0, Toolbox 3.0. So we are really thinking ahead, and probably the first ship will have the Toolbox 1.0, but the second will have already a new set of tools, more modern. And the challenge we are facing is to be sure the ship will accommodate those new tools. So we need to be very flexible in the building of the ship. One of the problems with drone, certainly a surface and subsurface drone, is the launch and recovery. The sea can be very cruel, and when you put something of a few tons into the water, after a few days you need to recover it, and there is a heavy sea. It's quite difficult. So we need to address the problem of launch and recovery, and to have those launch and recovery systems being able to employ 2.0, 3.0 without big change in the ship structure.
Now, a very, very challenging question that I'm a bit afraid to ask, but I want to ask anyway. We've heard this was mostly with AUVs, and I'll just focus with you on Philip on this one. With the use of unmanned system, is there an increased risk that UUVs and UAVs can be hacked and eventually hijacked by an adversary? We've seen stories with Iran, for example. Is that a fear within the industry?
I would say surface drone can be an issue because communication is open with surface drone, and it depends on the type of cybersecurity you want to implement. So it is really addressed. Normally, military people are quite good also in protecting their information. We have an encrypted system for decades to communicate. For underwater drone, it's another issue because communication underwater is very special, short distance. So it would be very difficult to hack an underwater drone. Normally the drone will come back to the ship to provide the data to the ship. So that's not a big problem, I think, for the drone which are being employed nowadays. Of course, if we think further, we think of drone going for weeks at sea, communicating with other type of communication system, that will be a problem also to provide top security for the system. But nowadays I don't see it's a big issue for underwater drone.
It's not only hacking. I think depending the area that you're in, whether it's in coastal waters, territorial waters of another nation, or whether you're in international waters, there is an international law that is specifying who owns what. Well, if a vessel is manned, then it's clear who owns that vessel. But once it is unmanned, then and you hijack it or you capture it, who owns it? Well, you can take it because it's unmanned. So there's way more to it than only hacking.
And Ronald, just building on that question, just a more open-ended question. When you see in the future, say in the next 5 to 10 years, what's the role of artificial intelligence, say, within those unmanned systems?
Oh, it's the aorta. Without AI, we will not move on. And I mean, it's the backbone of drones currently, and it will expand in everything we do, by the way, throughout society and of course also in the maritime domain.
Yeah, I can only go in the same way. So for underwater drone also, because we will send those drones for a few days to do reconnaissance of a big area, they will acquire hundreds of targets, false targets, real targets, and if they are not able to process that intelligence, that data, before sending it, it will take too much time for the operator to process it afterwards. And we will lose a lot of time and information.
We have a question here from Louis Bout. Does the construction of the anti-mine drone factory in Ostend, due to open in 2022, within the increasing calls, fit within the increasing calls for European strategic autonomy?
The construction of the drone fabric is part of the project, Belgium-Netherlands project to build new ship with toolbox. So ECA, the company who is building the toolbox, will build the drone in Ostend. Why Ostend? Because it's very close to the Navy, it's close to the sea, good facilities. So it also a question of strategic economic interest to give something back to the country who pay you for the ships. But what we also will do near the factory is to build a kind of laboratory to search for new system, artificial intelligence, and all kind of things we will need for Toolbox 2.0, 2.3. And it fit with the EDA and different kind of European project to provide a new generation of drone in the future. So we work together with Europe and NATO on those kind of projects. Does that answer the question?
Mm-hmm. Going to you, Ronald. An exciting question. So how do you address emerging technologies and ensure interoperability and standardization, especially within the alliance with all these different systems, unmanned systems?
Don't laugh, Philip. That's quite challenging. Compared to the air domain, the maritime is well known for small-scale production. And in this respect, the maritime domain is very vulnerable from an ICT perspective. When you look at Microsoft or Apple, they sell millions and millions of their operating systems. When you look in the maritime domain, we look at small suppliers, and they have the tendency to build a software layer on top of the existing software. So in general, especially in the merchant fleet, our ships are very vulnerable from an ICT perspective for hacking because the base layer originates from 1983. And it's scary because back then we didn't know anything about cyber risk. And even with this knowledge today, it's very hard to overcome this problem because, like I said, we're talking about small production numbers. So it's very expensive for manufacturers to build new software bottom up, completely secure to today's standards.
Let's go to an even more difficult question for NATO. NATO joint ISR architecture. With NATO's Alliance Ground Surveillance Program, providing commanders with situational awareness on both land and sea, AGS will have 4 RQ-4 Global Hawk unmanned vehicles. Are there any plans to increase this number? Because it seems not a lot, because the maritime domain is quite vast.
Yeah, well, I have a hard question in return, Jeffrey. Is it of added value that we do our presentation first before you continue with all your questions? Because we're answering all the questions, and some of these will be answered through our presentation. With regard to adding new tools to our toolbox, the challenge that we have in the alliance is that in general nations, the 30 member states, are responsible for their own military toolbox. And the same applies for their coast guards, etc. And NATO in general doesn't own its own toolbox. Some exemptions in transport, for instance, we have some transport planes that we operate together. So to get funding for a NATO product or a NATO project is hard, because there are always nations that object, and we operate by consensus. So it's challenging to move in that direction. So you're very happy even if you get small numbers. But you're spot on, given the challenges on maritime situational awareness in the maritime domain. We need way more. But that's something I want to address in my presentation.
Okay. Yes, please continue with your presentation.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for having us. 70% of our globe is covered by the world's oceans, and like Jeffrey said, over 90% of the world's trade is transported using the maritime domain, our oceans. So sea lines of shipping are like an aorta to mankind. Increasing demands with regard to shipping safety, effective law enforcement on organized crime, and especially environmental concerns require way more transparency in the worldwide maritime domain. This is where maritime situational awareness, in short MSA, comes in play. Maritime situational awareness implies a clear and complete overview of all shipping and objects at sea and underneath the surface, if in some cases, with regard to location, course and speed, intended movement, identity beyond doubt, cargo on board, and its intentions and next port of call. Sometimes MSA is detailed even to the level of crew member identity for law enforcement reasons. Now, maritime situational awareness comes from maritime intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, in short, maritime ISR. Now, from a military perspective, for obvious reasons, it has been important through time. But in more recent time, civil societies, and therefore civilian organizations, have developed a bigger demand for enlarging their MSA as well. Now, with regard to maritime ISR, I'd like to start with some metaphors. On land, you'll find cameras on every street corner in town, and the same applies on every highway when entering and leaving the country. At sea, you will find none. On land, you'll find cell phone coverage everywhere. At sea, you'll have coverage only within the coastal zone of 20 kilometers from the beach. On land, within the country's borders, the same legislation applies and for everybody. At sea, not so much. There are differences pending your location in territorial waters or international waters, pending ship's registration, the flag it's carrying, etc. In addition to this, the principle of libre of mare liberum applies. In short, free passage through territorial waters of other nations. So one cannot go on board a foreign flag ship just like that when it passes through your territorial waters. And on land, law enforcement is fairly easy relative to law enforcement at sea, which is way more complex. An example, it's way easier to search contraband in a car ashore than on board a merchant vessel carrying 21,000 sea containers. So to search these containers while at sea, it's physically unfeasible. On land, one is dealing with a clear methodology of registration of cars, planes, etc. At sea, once outside the territorial waters, registration and identification can be very easily manipulated. Overall, it becomes clear to obtain situational awareness in the maritime domain, because maritime ISR is so complicated, it's way more challenging than in the land and air domain. But for several reasons, it is at least as important. Now, because of technology, the world is becoming smaller, and some people believe that we can make the maritime domain as transparent as the land and air domain. But it's slightly more complicated. We're talking about huge areas, physical limitations to technology for effective use at sea, and considerable efforts required to have an overall picture. In recent decades on land, for organized crime, it has become increasingly harder to hide from law enforcement efforts and technology, like, for instance, cameras, Google Earth, and social media. Therefore, organized crime moved on and started to use the maritime domain to their benefit at a bigger scale. Now, maritime ISR behind the horizon, so outside the coastal zone of 20 kilometers from the coast, from a technology perspective is complex with regard to surface shipping. But ISR related to underwater objects is way more complex because of the behavior of sound through water, seawater, and the presence of, for instance, sea mammals, especially when we're talking about deep waters, so more than 200 meters deep. I'll keep it short, Jeffrey. Now, with regard to ISR in relation to environmental concerns in the maritime domain, illegal fishing makes over 60% of the world's fish caught. And it's an enormous problem for its worldwide scale and devastating effect to the ocean's food chain. So it is for mankind. As a second order effect, we've seen fishermen turning to piracy to make a living. Effective ISR with regard to illegal fishing is very complex, labor intensive, and therefore costly. ISR related to dumping chemical waste is very important in view of environmental second order effects. But to be effective, not easy to execute, and from a worldwide perspective in its infancy. To a certain extent, the same applies to monitoring of dumping sites of chemical ammunition after World War I and World War II. Though everybody is promoting ISR information exchange between countries and governmental organizations, it turns out to be easier said than done, as we have to deal, for instance, with legal aspects, politics, national security, privacy legislation, ICT costs, etc. But even if we overcome these issues and we're connecting the maritime situational awareness systems between nations or between governmental organizations, what are we looking at? Radar contacts for sure, but the related automated identification system on board ships can be easily manipulated by a ship's crew. So detection may be feasible, but identification beyond any doubt and continuous tracking is way more challenging. So from a law enforcement and military perspective, ISR at sea outside the coastal zone requires huge efforts. And with regard to law enforcement, traditionally the Coast Guard, for several reasons, is not going outside its coastal zone or EEZ, the Economic Exclusive Zone. So at the world's oceans, to build a solid maritime situational awareness picture you need the Navy. And at the same time, after 1990, the end of the Cold War, the majority of the NATO nations have cut their navies by 50%. So while for several reasons, for instance, less collateral damage in military operations and or environmental issues and or illegal fishing, etc., societies and politicians demand a better ISR, a better situational awareness in the maritime domain, but for real, our state-owned means available and today's efforts cannot keep up with the increasing demands and challenges. Now, from a financial and manning perspective, Western nations cannot completely resize their navies to Cold War standards. And the same applies to the Coast Guards. Though, given today's challenges and threats, I do believe major investments are required both in Western navies and Coast Guards from a military and civilian perspective and for environmental reasons. I think we should look in other ways as well. We have to focus as well into intel sharing between nations and organizational and government organizations. For instance, the Netherlands Coast Guard is a networked organization. It is governed and paid for by 6 ministries, and 8 governmental organizations work together in the operational maritime domain under one Coast Guard flag, under one director. And around the North Sea, you find 5 nations, the UK, the Netherlands, Belgium, Germany and France, working together to enrich each other's maritime situational awareness. It took years to arrange, and I consider it to be a good start. But for sure, not foolproof, despite the fact that we're looking at a relatively small sea area, called the North Sea. To provide you a general feeling for its complexity, like I started with, west of the Belgian coast, 260,000 ship movements a year. And pending your focus, whether that's ship safety or law enforcement or national security, the information requirement may be completely different. But regardless this focus, the information needs to be accurate and verified, as our societies have become very sensitive about collateral damage, second order effects, etc. Now, with regard to ISR at the world's oceans, way more is required and we're running short of time, mainly for reasons related to environmental issues and organized crime developments. So for several reasons over time, maritime ISR has become more important for the military as well. First, over time, the distance to engage your enemy increased from line of sight, looking each other in the eye and then hitting each other, to nowadays engaging your enemy at hundreds of kilometers distance behind the horizon. Second, the weaponry and ammunitions have become more expensive, production times have become very lengthy, and the amount of high-tech ammunition available at sea is limited. So selecting the wrong target behind the horizon comes at an increasingly high price. But because of asymmetric threats, that's non-state actors threatening state actors, non-state threats in the maritime domain, we have seen military operations, for instance, under UN mandate, to intertwine with issues related to civilian entities and or paramilitary and or piracy. So nowadays, even more than in the past, effective maritime ISR is critical to strengthen the red picture, meaning the enemy, to strengthen the blue picture, meaning the oversight of your own assets, and to strengthen the white picture. That's the location and identity of non-military shipping like merchants and fishermen. So overall, I'm concluding, related to the world's maritime domain, mankind is facing more and more serious issues, many of which societies are unaware or tend to neglect. In a way, I get it, as increasingly politics are driven by short-term focus, front-page headlines and social media. But less populist politicians can no longer turn away from major issues like, for instance, global and expanding global challenges and expanding organized crime. We need to invest in our maritime professionals, both military and civilian, and we need to enlarge our maritime intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance efforts, thus building our MSA and share that MSA, starting in the region to become more effective in today's challenges at sea. And like I said earlier, I appreciate the invitation and paying attention to the maritime domain because it's well deserved. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Philip, could you give your presentation on the naval mine, looking at its evolution, and also integrate one question from my side, which is what are the emerging technologies that influence the naval mine, in the sense that when we perceive the naval mine, we think World War I technology, World War II technology, acoustic, magnetic. How has that all changed?
Okay. So slide 1, please. If you look at the slide, you will see a very simple Russian mine with a contact mine. It's a mine you see in all picture, you know, in all movies, classic mine. Nowadays, such a mine can be very easily transformed into a very sophisticated mine. You just need a little electronic device, a few sensors who are very cheap. You put it in the mine and you will have a modern mine based on an old mine. A Russian mine, like the one on the picture top left, is $5,000 on the black market. You put maybe $200 electronic in it and you will have a modern mine with acoustic, magnetic, pressure sensor who will detect the ship passing on top, where the Russian mine was only destroying the ship when the ship hit the mine. So this is something that we don't know in advance. When we see a mine, when we find a mine on the bottom of the sea, we don't know what kind of sensor there is in the mine. Of course, we have intelligence, we have database with a lot of information of existing mine. You must know that for the moment we think there are still 400,000 mines in the North Sea and Baltic Sea from the First and Second World War. Second slide, please. On the second slide, you can see two chart of the First and Second World War, where for the blockade of German submarine, the Allied put 70,000 mines into the water. 70,000. So maritime ISR in the mine warfare domain is something very special. Why? Intelligence. You have some intelligence. You know who is producing mine. You know who has mine laying capabilities. That's the kind of intelligence you will have. You hope to know what kind of mine they have, what kind of sensor. Okay? So, Libya, for example, we had no information about the bottom because Italy was responsible for that area, but you cannot go with a survey ship and into Libyan territorial water to analyze their bottom. So you don't have intelligence on the environment you will face when you operate in that area. Surveillance. Okay, it would be easy if mine would only be put into the water by surface ship. But airplane can be used at night, quite discreet, not as such as a other way, but you can also put mine with a submarine. So you will not know if there are mine at the bottom. And reconnaissance. Okay, it's easy, like I say, if the terrorist mine Hamburg, Rotterdam, and Antwerp, it's in our own water. So we can send ships and try to find out if they are mine. But in enemy territory, you can it's very difficult to go with a squadron of MCM ships and try to find out if there is any risk for the invasion, the amphibious force who is coming after. That's what happened in Second World War. They have to clean the beach and the approach to the beach, risking their life under the fire of the enemy. So we need really to find a way to make those kind of to have those kind of information covertly, without the enemy knowing we are putting an effort to find out what's in the water. And for that, we need Toolbox 3.0. We need tools that can be sent very far away from the ships without the enemy knowing we have it in the area. Those instruments will need to be equipped with very modern communication system, SATCOM, and with very good sonar and processing capabilities. So they will be able to send the correct information to the decision maker to see, is it dangerous to come with an amphibious force to that beach? And this is the next step. Everybody is working very hard to make endurance is an issue, because if you want to go far, you need to go longer at sea, have more batteries of other system. Maybe in the future, hydrogen of other type of propulsion. But for the moment, we are using classical battery, and they are very expensive, and you don't have a lot of space in a drone. So endurance is an issue. Launching and recovery, like I say, is another issue. You can launch it. If you can launch it far away from the coast, you can launch it from a submarine. You can launch it from a ship of non-dedicated ship, from a merchant ship, equipped with a good crane. So there are different ways of launching it. But to recover the tool, if it's in enemy territory, you need to return, or we can go, stays there until we arrive. So maritime ISR in the domain of mine warfare is a little bit more complicated, because mine is more difficult to find, and there are different ways of replenishing the minefield. Another issue, environment, is an issue at the Belgium coast. You see dune along the coast, but there are also dune underwater. And the dune are moving. Every storm, the dune are moving. So you can find a mine at 12 o'clock, come back at 6 o'clock in the afternoon, and the mine disappear, because there is a small dune which came above the mine. So that's another challenge. And we are working on finding new instruments, new sensor, to be able to detect the mine under the sand, like laser technology and things like that. But it's very complicated, and the environment is not always working on our side.
All right. Just let's focus on the littorals for one moment. And let's take some popular culture. We've been in contact before, and we've said, I said to you, what's your favorite movie? And it was Captain Phillips. So my question was, of course, the movie was based on a true story. Hopefully, some people in the audience have watched it. Did they portray the radar picking up the two boats or the two skiffs approaching in their first failed attempt of the pirates? Was it properly conveyed in the film?
No. And it's like in the Hollywood movies when they take binoculars. You see these two round circles simulating what you see through a binocular. And same applies to radar image. So of course in a Hollywood movie they will not show you the complicated issues that we have on radar, sonar, etc. But then again, it's about amusing the people. So keep it simple, and you're spot on. At a flat sea, to identify, to locate, to detect and locate contacts can be pretty easy within the radar horizon. So for small targets, that's like 10 nautical miles, so 15, 18 kilometers. But the smaller the targets, like skiffs, they have a very small radar reflecting surface. You will not get them at outside the 10 kilometers. But for the movie, it looks good.
So so in real life, no two pretty dots. Okay, great. In reality, so what would it be? There will be more noise, more clutter, such as the possibility of false positives.
Absolutely, you're spot on. But then again, there are more ways in detecting. It's not only radar. Of course, in the movie they show you the radar picture, but in the military domain, you can use a towed sonar, a passive sonar as well. And from my own experience, skiffs produce a lot of noise with their outboard engines, and you can detect them at 25 kilometers just using sonar. You don't see anything on the surface, because it's behind the horizon. You don't see it at radar, but you see it on your sonar. And of course, you can use your helicopters, your maritime patrol aircraft, or your aerial drones. So, in the law enforcement, but especially in the military maritime domain, the navies, we use several tools from the box to have a complete picture. And we connect the ships as well. So over a large distance, I can provide my sensor picture to you being 300 kilometers away. So if you have a network of ships, you can connect the dots. And this way you build your overall maritime situational awareness.
Let's further build on that one about intelligence sharing with different ships. You have both worked in the military and a civilian network organization, so you know both sides. Intelligence sharing is critical in this domain. How do you address the challenges associated with civilian organizations that are reluctant to share intelligence? Is there a need for a cultural change to increase synergy between civilian and military organizations?
In general, I've found both on the military and the civilian side professionals all the way. And in many ways, people that go to sea, regardless where they come from, they share the same values, the same culture, the same focus mindset. And they help each other out at sea. But and there are not that many politics at sea. Ashore, between governmental organizations, legal issues come into play, and it's mainly legislation limitations that are perceived, by the way, that limit us in the amount of progress that we can make into sharing our sensor information. And some nations are fairly flexible. When I look at Belgium or the Netherlands, we can talk to our professional, in between the organization, we can talk and share information. But there are nations nearby that have very strict limitations between the organizations to share intel. And that's politics as well.
Further building on that, the naval mine is a real threat. We've seen that there's still a lot of World War I, World War II mines around the world. However, what are the key hotspots? Like, some nations are still interested in naval mine technologies. For example, China has a huge number of mines, which I've completely forgotten the number, but it goes into the tens of thousands. What is your, fear in a sense that the Strait of Hormuz being mined, or other hotspots being mined?
Slide 1, please. On slide 1, you will see on the top right a flotilla of Iranian ship with a mine on the afterdeck. Okay, so they are ready. They can come and cross the channel and put mine in front of every harbor. But it will not be very discreet. Let's say, I think the big danger we are facing, because when we are speaking about littoral warfare, we are also speaking about choke point, like in the vicinity of Sumatra and some place in the world, Hormuz, where you have really a small place to go with a lot of ships, and where it's very vulnerable to mine blockade. And what we have seen in the last year, that most of the country, certainly in Southeast Asia, are building a lot of submarines, to face the territorial differences they have with their neighbors. And all the submarines are equipped with mine-laying capability. So they could very easily block a very important strait. Take 2 submarines with in total 16 mine, and you will put a lot of problem in a strait. It is very difficult to detect. You don't know you don't have a lot of information about the technologies they have, the kind of mine they have. For the moment, there are not many countries producing mine. You have the USA, you have Russia, China, Iran, Italy, and North Korea, and China, of course. Russia, we estimate Russia as approximately 250,000 mine. China, more than 100,000. So we are facing a big risk, and you can buy it. Now selling it. Let's be honest, Russia is selling mine to every country who wants to buy a mine. And those mine are not the simple mine you have seen on the first picture. They are what we call mine equipped with fuzzy logic. So very intricate logic. They will not explode on the first ship coming through. They will really, for example, wait for a week, and they cannot be. They have a really good artificial intelligence on board to be able to detect the big target. So they will not explode on the frigate, but they will wait for the aircraft carrier. And that's the problem we are facing. You don't know which kind of technology you have in which mine. So you have to go always for the worst case. And it takes time when you will go for worst case.
But Jeffrey, allow me to respond to your question as well. I think the biggest issue we have in the world is not the black and white situation. In peace there are no mines, and in war there are a lot of mines in the water. It's the gray zone in between. Only if you have the capacity, so you have mine laying capacity and you have the mines available, the technology, when you threaten to use the mine laying weapon, the opponent, how does he respond? Because you don't know whether they drop the mine or not. So in many cases, I think nations are threatening to use it, but actually don't use it themselves because you're hampering your own shipping as well. If Iran starts to push out a lot of mines in the Arabian Gulf, then their own shipping, their own oil export, whether it's illegal or not, is hampered as well. Especially because these mines tend to move unexpectedly. So it's the gray zone that's causing a lot of confusion, and therefore the mine weapon is also used from a psyops, as we call it, psychological warfare, just to threaten it. Can have dramatic effects, and that's where after 9/11, from an asymmetric threat perspective, we realized, okay, what if people threatened to throw a mine somewhere at the North Sea in front of a major port, like Philip mentioned. You don't tell whether that's Antwerp, Hamburg, or Rotterdam, but it's quite complicated and time-consuming to investigate all these areas and to assure to a 95% clarity, something like that.
96 2 sigma, yeah.
That it's clear. And you lose a lot of business just by threatening that there is a mine or a couple of mines out there.
We have a question from the online audience, from Kieran Watkins. He asks, how important is the security of port areas to ensuring wider maritime security?
I think Kieran is spot on. It's especially for Western societies critical to keep your port infrastructure open, not only from the sea side but also on ICT. I believe it was a year or two ago, in the port of Rotterdam, that a container terminal was infiltrated by malware, and they had a 300 million euro damage. Now, it doesn't show because it's in cyberspace, but that's serious money. And like Philippe said, our societies have become just enough, just in time with regard to logistics. If we close down a port like Rotterdam, within 4 days, factories have to close, because so many industries in the Western world rely heavily on components coming from the other side of the world. So he's spot on.
Let's go back to the naval mine. So when we think about the naval mine, we think immediately there has to be contact. However, it's more complicated than that, as you said before. What's the impact of, how does a naval mine actually explode? Are we just talking about real contact or the explosion effect?
No, nowadays, modern mine doesn't explode anymore by contact. The mine will be placed at a depth depending on the amount of explosive it's in the mine. Like I say, 1,000 kilogram of equivalent TNT at 60 meter will have a little effect on a surface ship. Okay, so it's almost a maximum. 60 meters almost maximum for a classic mine. But you have also mobile mine, who will be released when something is detected and come near the surface, and then improve their effect on the surface ship. Speaking about sensors, during the Second World War, First World War was only contact. Second World War, they start to develop, the Germans start to develop sensor to detect magnetism. So a ship is most of the time a big piece of iron, and so produce a lot of a big magnetic field, and the mine will detect that, and so explode. We try to sweep the mine by producing an artificial mine field, magnetic field, and we hope the mine will explode. But some mines are very intelligent, and they will detect that we are faking a ship, because they will also measure if there is a water displacement. When a ship goes through the water, he will apply a pressure on the water, okay, in front of the ship, and the mine will detect that. If the two, the magnetic and the pressure, are not at the same time, the mine will say, it's not a ship, I'm not interested. Then you will add acoustic. The ship will produce noise with a screw. So no screw, no ship, I don't explode. And then, nowadays you have also seismic vibration. A ship will have pumps and things like that to produce vibration, and they will also detect if there are any instruments above producing vibration. If there are no vibration, there is not a ship, so I will not explode. So mine are becoming very complicated. It's very cheap. Sensors are nowadays very cheap, easily to install, and it is very difficult to counter the mine because of that. In the Second World War, it was quite easy. You had to pass with your ship, produce an acoustic signal and a magnetic signal, and you will make the mine explode. Nowadays, you most of the time you will have to find the mine and to send another what we call a small drone with an explosive on the mine to destroy the mine. It is very complicated because you need to know the position of the mine. You need to find the mine back. If you wait too long, you remember with the dune, the mine disappears. So it's very complicated, and it's time consuming. And time is very important in warfare, because if you tell your commanding officer who want to make an amphibious assault on a beach, you will have to wait 2 weeks because I need to be sure there are no mines. He will say, no, I give you 2 days. So the challenge of the future will be to be able to go very fast and to be efficient. And the only solution, I think, is with very effective drone with very good computing capability on board and good endurance.
Those are a lot of challenges, with your requirements and procurement background. How do you? We've seen technologies with ships growing more complex, building countermeasures against magnetic, against acoustic sensors. What is the current status in a sense? Like, are there more? What is keeping you awake when these ships are in the littorals? When it comes to the naval mine?
It seems like a simple question, but the answer is not that simple. First of all, traditional thinking is when I attack another country, I attack its military. I believe nowadays, from an asymmetric perspective, to cripple a country, you don't have to attack its military. For instance, if you want to cripple the Netherlands, just destabilize or block the port of Rotterdam, and within a week you will have massive effects throughout the country. So, and you can build perfect ships to overcome a lot of threats, but it comes at a huge cost. And we've seen in Western nations that we don't spend that much on armed forces anymore. I mean, the 2% NATO norm is not met by the majority of nations. And so you have to make choices. And the navies are competing with air forces, armies, military police, and other entities. And even within Navy procurement, you're competing on several projects. So in, I think, the last 50 years, well, maybe before the Second World War, we were trying to build ships that could endure everything. I mean, massive panzer, heavy guns, etc., etc. But even the Bismarck was crippled. So I think nowadays we don't try to protect our ships through passive means, like anti-magnetic steel on our surface ships, but more through active means. For instance, what a huge example is using drones to stay with the mothership outside the danger area and to send your drones inside the danger area. But of course, it's a mixture, because on submarines, you have to invest in passive means to defend yourself, because using drones on submarines is way more complex and costly than on surface ships. So it's a complicated question, a complicated answer to what seems to be a very easy question. Yeah, that's it.
I mean, in the mine warfare, the choice is not made yet. Belgium and Netherlands have decided to build cheap ships who are not equipped with anti-magnetic system and things like that. They have the basic things, but not as complicated as we had before, because it's very expensive. And we go from the principle we will stay outside the minefield with the ship, so we don't need to protect the ship against the mine. Just the basic protection, because the drone will go further. There are still some countries, Germany, for example, Italy, who still don't believe it in that, and they still believe they will need to go into the minefield. So they are building very expensive ship who will take drone with them. So it's another policy, because they don't believe really in the future. They don't believe the drone are ready yet. So there's still a fight in NATO between the two policy. And we will see when the project of Belgium and Netherlands will come out. We hope it will work. And we will convince the rest of the world that it is a good system.
Yeah, and in shipbuilding, you always have to compromise. So from mine warfare perspective, that Philippe is focused on and specialized in, that's a single focus in general. But on big combatants like frigates, destroyers, etc., you're always choosing between several options, threats, because it's not only the underwater threat, it's the surface threat and the aerial threat as well. So you need a high maneuverability, pending the task of a frigate. If you want to escort a aircraft carrier, your frigate needs to be able to keep up at speed, high speeds, enormous speeds that we're normally not used to. And then you have to build light ships. Yeah, heavy engines, light ships. But then again, if you want to protect yourself against underwater threat like mines, it comes with measures. You want very quiet ships, very specific propellers underneath your ships. But that will not provide you the maximum speed that you require in escorting others. So it's always a compromise, and there are budget limitations.
We have a question from the audience again, more about the technology side. This is a question for both of you. How do concerns, from Jerzy Kremensky, how do concerns over China's presence in 5G infrastructure resonate within the maritime military industry? Philip?
Like Ronald say, we are happy at sea because we don't have 5G at sea.
Not yet.
Not yet. So only very, very near the coast, you will have maybe an issue with mobile network security. But normally, when you are outside 15, 20 kilometers, you will not have any connection anymore. So you will rely on SATCOM, satellite communication, which is also an issue because they are now also building anti-satellite missile and things like that. So I don't know what the next step will be, but
well, this is keeping me awake. So I think Jerzy's asking a very good question. First of all, we have more and more objects at sea. Traditionally, we had oil platforms, but now throughout Europe at sea, we're constructing wind turbine parks. And with that, we spread our cell phone coverage, especially at the North Sea, because the North Sea soon from now will be covered 40% by, especially in the southern part, by wind turbine parks. But at our oceans, currently, Philippe is spot on. However, China is leading in AI and leading in 5G technology. And you have interest, especially from big players in the US, to create a global network of satellites, 5G satellites, and they're talking about 5,000 small satellites providing 5G services with a global coverage. And if that is out there, suddenly the maritime domain, regardless where you are, becomes, has access to 5G, but becomes vulnerable to 5G hacking as well.
Building upon that, but let's look up for space assets. How important are space assets currently for maritime ISR operations, and how will they grow in further importance in the next, say, decade?
Well, your last question is very difficult to answer because I cannot look into the future, and we've seen enormous developments in that respect. In general, satellites are costly. Only a handful of nations are able to launch and operate satellites that can be used for ISR. Because there's a huge difference between, there's a huge variety in satellites. It's becoming more important, but it will not provide you, if you have one satellite over the Atlantic Ocean, it will certainly not provide you one picture making the complete ocean transparent. And even if you have an aerial view of a certain area, a sea area, you'll look on top of a ship, but it doesn't have a registration number on top and a flag painted. So you locate a ship, but to identify it is a completely different ballgame. So once again, in the Hollywood movies, it looks great. And it seems, I've been told, James Bond is an expert on this. and their technology. But for real, it's way more complicated. And I don't see any major changes in the next 10, 15 years in this domain.
And
I think a big role for the satellite will be to be able to provide communication relay between the drone who have big endurance will be too far away from the ship to communicate with a radio and things like that. So the only way to transmit the information will be through satellite. So it's still very important for any type of warfare when you want to send a drone far away from the base or from the main ship.
so we have also seen the increased deployment of unmanned vehicles, but there's also counter-unmanned autonomous systems. Considering that the littorals are already contested, will that put another ball game towards it where unmanned vehicles against unmanned vehicles combat?
You know, like a little joke, we had drone 30 years ago about on mine enters, and it was called PAP. And on top of the drone, there was if found, return to Belgium or Dutch Navy. Huh? So nowadays, of course, the drones are anonymous, and they can be threatened by different systems. Not only hacking, but a fishing net is terrible for a drone. So we are building in the drone avoidance sonar. So a sonar will see if there is a fishing net in front of the drone, if there is any other danger in front of the drone. We are building anti-aerial drone. It's quite easy. You can shoot out a drone from the air. To shoot out a drone in the water is not so easy, because to localize the drone is very difficult. You need to have a very good drone, which is very expensive. So you have the simple way, fishing net, mobile fishing net, drifting fishing net, and so things like that. But I think to go further and really attack the drone, I'm not sure it's very efficient.
Let's look at a special relationship a little bit outside of the subject matter, but it goes with the Belgium and Netherlands. Like, a lot of people have asked questions about your unique relationship, having integrated navies with, say, for example, Admiral Benelux, which is completely unseen in other countries. We had the Benelux Declaration on Defense Cooperation, which deepened it, which was in 2012. From your view, how does NATO look at this close relationship? And could it be some sort of groundwork for future enhanced cooperation within the alliance?
I think in general, it's a pity that the Luxembourg Navy is not participating. But then again, they don't have ships. No, I think we can be proud on the cooperation between the two navies and their integration. And I think it's a very smart way to overcome costs that you can avoid. So we combined the training facilities. We combined the maintenance facilities. And that way you have to invest only in one location and not in other locations. But it requires a very good agreements as well, because our foreign policies are not aligned that much. But what happens in crisis and in wartime? Now, wartime is easy because Article 5 of NATO kicks in, and an attack on one is an attack on all. So everybody goes out to sea and will help each other. But especially in the gray phase, you may have a Belgian government that's forward-leaning with regard to a certain area that is being threatened, while the Dutch government is reluctant, or the other way around. And how do you deal with that? Well, we integrated a lot, but we don't have mixed crews so far. And but I think that's the way forward for us, because we're facing many issues. The navies are competing with our other areas in society, and from a demographic perspective, we're facing massive challenges. Now, when you compare it to other nations in NATO, and you ask them, why don't you do the same like the Netherlands and Belgian Navy did, you'll have several answers. First of all, some nations don't have a manning issue. Some nations are not very friendly to their neighbors. If you look in a completely different area in the southeast, you have nations that are not that friendly towards each other. So they will not cooperate. But especially the bigger navies, the bigger nations, pay high value to their independence. And when you start to integrate, you become more dependent on your neighbor as well. So there are pros and cons to all this. But given the budget cuts that we've been facing since 1990, the end of the Cold War, I think it was the best way forward for two navies to get the best out of their limited budget. And I've seen and spoken with colleagues from other navies and seen what they are doing. And of course, there is cooperation on the northern flank between Scandinavian countries, and more cooperation between the US Navy and the Canadian Navy, because they're so close. Of course, they look at our cooperation, but not to an extent that they will do the same tomorrow. And I think it's not likely that will change fast. Having said all that, in some areas, specific areas, there is NATO-wide more and more cooperation. If you look in the submarine area, we have not that many producers of submarines. Germany is a major one. So several NATO nations bought German-built submarines. And they created one maintenance pool and one pool of spare parts and one training facility. So step by step, you see more and more nations following what we did years ago.
So this is a question for both of you, perhaps more leaning to Philip. Do you share or does this resonate with you, that with the growing increase of autonomous, high-endurance and multi-mission systems, that the armed forces will become more specialized and smaller, perhaps the evolution of the Belgium armed forces?
Everybody is hoping that we will be able to do the same job with less people. But let's face the fact that when you see the bee hunter is a big drone flying in the air, there is a pilot behind the stick, and there is a maintenance crew, and there are analysts. There is an observer. So it's less dangerous for the pilot because he's not flying in that engine. He's on the ground. But the number of people is still the same. Nowadays, the new ship will have less people on board. But when a toolbox will be embarked, it will be accompanied by a number of people specialized to utilize those drones. You need to process the information, you need to analyze and to maintain the drones. So I don't think we will win a lot of people by going into autonomous system. A lot of people are hoping you will win people, but I think we will win in security and efficiency. We will do more with less.
I think early 80s, Mr. Microsoft told us you should buy our computers and you end up in a paperless office and you can save on people. I think we all can agree that people moved in another area but were not saved, and we certainly didn't create a paperless office. And more or less the same applies to the domain of unmanned systems. In general, what you see is, yes, our crews on board our surface ships and subsurface ships tend to become smaller over decades. That's not related to unmanned systems. That's related to automation and stuff like that. But like Philip is saying, I like to echo that one. If you bring aboard autonomous systems, you need specialists to operate them and to analyze the data, etc. So in general, what we see in the armed forces, and it's not only applying to the sea domain, but air and land domain, exactly the same is happening. Armed forces overall tend to scale down a little bit on manning, but they need more and more highly trained specialists. And I think the same applies to many companies in private companies. And more, we're competing with these private companies for these technical and operational specialists. And that's a serious issue, becoming a serious issue. And the way out, well, first of all, we don't stop the automation and we don't stop the injection of more high-tech in the military domain. And we see from a demographic perspective in many Western nations that it becomes more and more challenging to find the right people at the right time in the right amount. So I think we have to start thinking a different way and create a strategic alliance with private companies, private entities, hold hands together. And by the way, that's not new. When I served in Afghanistan, we had more private contractors, Western private contractors in the country than military. And today's military operations are no longer solely military. It's also private contractors that are in there. And the way out for our challenges is to have these strategic bonds with private companies.
So there'll be a very strong increasing role. Well, for what you're saying, there's already an high increased role of third-party logistics service providers manning or maintaining all these drones already.
Yeah, I appeal to the audience tonight, step away from foreign politics and find your way into this business. Big money to be made for you guys.
We have one question from Amanita Dea. It goes to one of our previous subjects. Is how do you integrate data access and processing capacities across military dimensions, air, space, and maritime? And if you could please discuss a little bit on the civil-military nexus.
Can you say it again? Because
no, I know there are. Okay, we know, everybody know about the cloud, but there are military cloud who are being developed. Really, they are very good. Not experiment, are already quite operational. I know some navies, some armed force who are using military cloud to make an integration of data from land, air, and maritime domain. So it's already be used in some country who are well advanced in that kind of technology because they have a lot of enemies around them. So maybe you can locate it. It's in Middle East, and so they need to really fast find new technology. And if you want to exchange a lot of data, really big data, you need something like that, a cloud, when you can really very fast exchange data. It needs to be protected, of course, because it's on the cyber side. It's very important to protect that cloud very well.
Yeah, but it goes against our nature. Military tend to be thinking backups. Yeah, you like to reduce your vulnerabilities as much as you can, and especially in crisis, you don't want to be too dependent on cloud services that require a very stable wideband connection. And especially in the maritime domain, when you're in the high seas, far away from your homeland, you may become vulnerable in this respect. So yeah, Philippe is right. We're looking in these features, but traditionally we we like to be independent as well, so we need an on-location backup aboard your ship. But there's another thing related to this. People are not aware that 97% of the internet traffic on our globe goes through underwater cables. And we think everything goes through satellites, but it's mainly underwater cables. And these cables are vulnerable to Russian capacity. So same applies. You can have cloud services ashore in a data center, but how do you guarantee access in crisis? If it's a low-end crisis, peace enforcing operations, well, I think access will be guaranteed. But once you go in the high threat domain, you become more and more vulnerable.
We have another question from Jersey. Kreminski. Over the past 2 decades, land border ISR has developed rapidly to military grade. Given such challenges as escalating climate refugee crisis, do you foresee similar developments for maritime borders?
Do we have a marked border at sea? No, not
no. I know. We are already providing radar system to a certain country in the Mediterranean to be able to detect illegal immigration, and there are nowadays very sophisticated radar who can detect a swimmer at 10 kilometers. And at the same time, it can also detect somebody on the land. So they are ideal to protect coastal borders to illegal immigration and illegal activities. Because we talk a lot about immigration, but there are also a lot of illegal activities going alongside the coast. Drugs and weapon and other things.
Well, Jersey is posing a very interesting question, and from a technical perspective, Philip is spot on. Of course, we have the means available nowadays to create a barrier of sensors, but it's the legal aspect that comes into play. You cannot build a wall at sea; it will sink. And once you find migrants at sea, you're obliged to save them. And of course, you can try to send them back, like we see on the southern flank to Libya, but then other issues come into politics come into play, etc. So, from a technical perspective, yes, we can. Land ISR can be copied to the maritime domain, but from a legal perspective, it's way more complicated.
The final question. Looking at, say, potential new regional tensions, and particularly carving up the Arctic. From your operational experience, what sort of challenges do you foresee in navigating in such an unforgiving environment?
There's a lot of discussion on the melting ice, the polar ice, allowing the northern route, so from the Bering Strait, north of Russia, north of Siberia, north of Russia, into Europe. So even if that sea lane is opened because ice is melting, then we are facing a serious issue with regard to shipping safety. Because within the polar circle, you don't have that many Coast Guard stations and other units to help you out when you're facing a problem. So when a ship is asking for help or needs to be salvaged, that will require a lot of time, potentially risking a lot of damage to the environment. So from a technical perspective, it may be feasible to navigate through the northern route, and with the satellite coverage, that's no longer an issue. But it's mainly shipping safety that should be guaranteed. And that is not easily overcome.
We do have a last-minute question from Inga van der Stein. It's two parts. Where does maritime surveillance fit in NATO's overall strategy? And the second part is the success measured by the 4 Rs of Russia: relevance, refugees, and resources.
On the first question, the NATO countries operate together in peacetime, doing exactly that, focusing at creating a complete maritime picture. Identify the pattern of life, as we call it, the shipping routes and how non-military ships behave and where our opponents are. In this case, the Russian ships. That's what we do all the time. Now, it is challenging, that's what I explained, but that's where we focus, apart from training. I think that answers her first question, and the second question was?
The second question is the success measured by the 4 Rs of Russia: relevance, refugees, and resources.
So she's asking whether NATO is measuring that?
Yeah, let's rephrase the question. So with maritime surveillance, how do you measure success in the short term or even long term? Like, what would be the markers for you?
That's a complete science, and it's easy to manipulate science. We discussed this up front, Philippe and I did. It's a very good question, and I believe it differs from nation to nation. So some NATO nations are mainly focused at their territorial waters or EEZ, and some nations, because of their foreign policy, have a way wider view on this and tend to go out and have sea dominance. So it depends on nations how they measure it. In general, within NATO, we're a political organization with a military output, of course, but we don't measure here at NATO HQ those 4 Rs. That's a national initiative, but they feed in to some military commands, and the maritime domain is led through Northwood in England, where we have an operational HQ, and of course they do some stuff on this.
So we have to end it here. I'll share a few announcements. On the 10th of November, we will have our next event called Defense Infrastructure. And if you are not a member of YPFP, YPFP is offering an exclusive discount valid for the next 24 hours. The code can be seen below. And if you enjoyed the live stream, please like and subscribe. Finally, please join me and thank Ronald and Philip for joining us at YPFP. Thank you for attending YPFP's live stream. We would like to kindly ask you if you can provide your feedback on the event through the following QR code or accompanying link, which is also provided in the description box below. Thank you for attending YPFP's live stream. We would like to kindly ask you if you can provide your feedback on the event through the following QR code or accompanying link, which is also provided in the description box below. Thank you for attending YPFP's live stream. We would like to kindly ask you if you can provide your feedback on the event through the following QR code or accompanying link, which is also provided in the description box below.